Introduce Dr. Fred A. Mettler, Professor Emeritus and Clinical Professor at the Department of Radiology and the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. Dr. Mettler received a BA from Columbia University, an MD degree from Thomas Jefferson University, and a master's degree in public health from Harvard University. He has authored over 365 scientific publications, including 23 textbooks. He is an Emeritus Commissioner of the International Committee on Radiological Protection, an Emeritus member of the U.S. National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, and a former member of the Nuclear and Radiation Studies Board of the U.S. National Academies. He was the U.S. representative to UNSCEAR for 28 years. He was the health effects team leader in the International Chernobyl Project. He has served as an expert on radiology and radiation effects and accidents for New York City, the U.S. Departments of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security, the World Health Organization, and the International Atomic Energy Agency. He is currently a health advisor to the Japanese cabinet for the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Dr. Mettler, please.
Thank you. I'm honored and humbled to be here and to have been invited, especially with all the staff of the RERF, Dr. Niwa and Ulrich, and to all the survivors and members of the public. I must say that I struggled a long time with this lecture or speech. On? Is that better? Maybe.
Testing.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I must say I struggled a long time with the topic that I was given and how to deal with it. I've obviously been practicing in medicine for going on half a century now, and spent a fair bit of that time dealing with radiation effects. I know that RERF is called the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, and to me, I think more of it as not just research. They do other things, and the critical part, at least in my world of practicing, is that data is collected, it's critically and scientifically analyzed, and then it's disseminated, so that all of what's happened to many of you doesn't just stop, that it gets distributed to the world in an organized and scientific fashion. And I thought about that for quite a while, and I finally decided that, in my mind at least, and in all the years I've practiced, it's the gift of knowledge that you have given to all of us out there. And as you'll see as we go through this talk, that it's not just me. The words I want you to take home is that you've affected millions and billions of people. And we'll go ahead and show you a little bit of that. So that one didn't go. So obviously there are many sources of radiation, and you're familiar with a lot of them. We have medical exposure with CT scans and many other types of medical exposure. This is now one of the largest sources of exposure to people in the world. It probably, at least in our country, in the United States, equals that from natural background. There are natural sources of radiation. So radiation comes out of the Earth itself. And then there's radiation that comes to us from galaxies and from the sun. So cosmic radiation. And we're going to talk more about that. Then there's a whole category of occupational exposure. All the people out there that have chosen to work with radiation. And then there is what we call technologically enhanced radiation, which includes anything that we have done ourselves to make radiation more than it was before. That would include having things like radioactive smoke detectors. It would include doing things like smoking tobacco that has radiation and radioactive materials in it. So there are all these sources, but at the end of the day, your gift of knowledge actually applies to every one of these things. Not just one, not just two, but all of it. So, a lot of the contributions and your gifts come in scientific articles published by RERF and scientists. And they're pretty obscure journals to most people out there in the world. There are things like the Radiation Research Journal. But here, for example, are two papers, one by Ozas and Company and by Eric Grant, which are pretty recent. And you might think, how important could that be if all this stuff is just buried in some scientific journal that the New York Times and the Japanese media don't read? And the answer is, it's incredibly important stuff. So there has to be a mechanism where data gets from you through RERF in some scientific fashion and then gets distributed to the world, who then uses it in their daily lives. The next thing is, here's a curve. Right? You might look at this curve and say to yourself, oh, it's a bunch of lines, and it's not very interesting. In fact, this happens to be one of the crown jewels of science, and particularly radiation science. That simple-looking graph comes from data from you all, and as you'll see in a second, it affects every one of those things for millions and billions of people. So what's important about that? How do we know? And what's come out of data derived from the RERF studies? Well, the graph we just saw shows how much cancer risk increases with dose. So here we have on the bottom, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to change that. Here we have on the bottom dose, and here we have increase in cancer risk. And this is the data that goes. And basically what you see here is we can say if somebody gets a certain dose, how much their cancer risk might go up. And that's very important. These doses, however, here are actually very high doses. And mostly what we're interested in for daily work is what happens down at lower doses. And there is data on that graph. Could we go forward one more there? Can we catch up with this slide? There we go. Oh, back there. So what happens at low doses? People will tell you, oh, we don't know much about radiation. They'll always say, we don't know exactly what's going on. In fact, we know a lot of what's going on. And we have a very good idea of what it is. So here, at the low doses, RERF studies show us that the cancer risk at low doses is very difficult to see. And why would it be difficult to see? Well, radiation is not a very strong carcinogen, and lots of people get cancer from other sources. So in my country, 40-some% of people get cancer, and about 22% of them die from it. So if you have another cause of cancer, and you say, how much does that do? It's very difficult to tell sometimes. But we know it's not bigger than a certain number, at least. And you can also see here that this is the data, these points. This is uncertainty about the points. And then people try to model what really might be happening. And there's all sorts of ways of modeling. But the bottom line is that we know pretty much how much cancer is caused at doses that are getting down to low. And at really very low, people will say we don't know. And the answer is we don't know whether it's here or there. But we know it's really low. Another thing that has come out of your data is that not all tissues act the same. And this is surprising to a lot of people. So in our bodies, we have lots of different organs, and some of them are more sensitive to radiation than are the other ones. And you can see here, for example, that if you take all cancers and put them together, you say, well, that's the risk here. But really, that number is made up of all these different organs. And in the body, there's breast and lung and so forth, and they're pretty sensitive to radiation causing cancer. And there's others, like prostate, that doesn't seem to be due to radiation. And that's surprising to a lot of people, but it's very important when I have a patient who comes to me and says, I'm working in the nuclear industry and I've got prostate cancer, would it be due to radiation exposure? I could say, no, I don't think so. What if they came in and said they had breast cancer? I would say, maybe. And we could sort of give them an estimate. But that's very important stuff. The next thing that has come out of this is that not only are tissues different, but the tumors are different in when they express themselves. This is an old slide about leukemia, and it shows that if you get exposed when you're really young, you get a risk pretty quick. But after about 20 years, that risk seems to be gone. And it's not likely you're going to get it later. And it changes with how old you were. All the tumors turn out to be different. Some tumors seem to increase with time. The risk goes up after exposure. Some of them stays the same. But they're all a little bit different. And we never knew any of that before the RERF data came out. Now, enough of science, okay? That's enough. That's all the curves I'm showing you from here on out. We're going into how useful is this and what difference does it really make to people. So basically, the jewels and the gift of knowledge that you have given allow us to assess the balance of benefits versus risk. So if I want to do something that involves radiation, or I want to start a new practice involving radiation, somebody's going to say to me, how much is the risk? And from your data, I know that. And the tougher part actually is saying, well, what's the benefit from what I'm going to do? I mean, if you just take, I don't know, nuclear power, you have all sorts of benefits, economic and other things, and some of the risks are radiation. But all the data and how this is all used around the world, what you have given the world is the gift to make this balance and to see how things actually balance out and whether you want to do them and whether you want to incorporate them. So there's some numbers coming along here that may surprise you. So I was going to give you a quiz, but I don't have time. How many x-rays are done in the world each year? Can you guess? Maybe about 2 billion? Would you guess that would be a number? So every year in the world, 2 billion medical x-rays are done. And the doctors have to sit there and say, should I do this chest x-ray or shouldn't I? If I think you have pneumonia, and I'm pretty sure I don't need to do the x-ray. But if I think it might be something else, it might be worth doing the x-ray, even if there's some small amount of risk associated with that. Okay, how many cases of new cancer are there every year in the world? Turns out 14 million new cancer cases every year in the world. And virtually, I would say the vast majority of those are diagnosed and staged using radiation, whether it's, in this case, this is a CT scan with nuclear medicine data put on top of it. Those procedures are reasonably high dose as far as medicine goes. They're, a couple hundred chest x-rays worth. So I wouldn't just go doing these on somebody if I really didn't think they had cancer or something that was really important. But 14 million new cancer patients every year are relying on your data as to should they get this thing done or shouldn't they get it done. Also, it's kind of strange that we use radiation to detect cancers when we know the radiation might cause a cancer. So you're all familiar with mammography, and obviously it can detect cancers. There are other methods we have, MRI and ultrasound and stuff, but they don't work anywhere near as well as the radiation mammography techniques. But we've got to figure out when we're doing this, how much radiation are we using and what's the risk from that in causing a cancer, and how many cancers can we find? And there's a way we do that. This is data actually from RERF. And what this shows you is that this is age at exposure here, and this is risk of breast cancer. And you can see in young women or children, the risk of breast cancer is pretty high. And it drops off pretty nicely as you get into 40s and 50 years of age. And so, would you start doing mammograms in young girls? You'd say, well, that's ridiculous. Why would I say that? Because I have your data, I know that. And you also know that breast cancers get more as you get older normally. So what I'm looking for is a place where the radiation risk is pretty low from the mammogram and the risk of cancer is high, so that I have a high ratio between the benefit and the risk. This also not only applies to mammography, but for example, here in Japan, stomach cancer, as I understand it, is the leading cause of death from cancer in Japan. And for many, many years, you have been doing screening for stomach cancer. And there are Japanese guidelines out, and they've looked at ways of screening for cancer of the stomach. And what they've come up with is here, that when you do fluoroscopic studies with radiation, that's the one that's recommended. And you'd say, but you told me radiation might cause stomach cancer, and the answer is yes. At these doses, very low chance and likely to occur much later. And the chances of finding a stomach cancer now is much more important. And you see here that the other methods in Japan that might be available are really not recommended. So with your data, we know what we ought to be doing, or what ought to be happening here. There are other things we get into all the time with people who smoke, or we do a CT scan on them, and you find a little lung nodule or something like this, and then there's always a big ruckus about, do you need another CT scan in 3 months, or 4 months, or 6 months, or what do you do? And in fact, mostly if the person's a non-smoker and pretty young, we'll do maybe one CT scan and stop. But if it's a smoker, we might do serial CT scans over 2 years or so, because we know their risk of lung cancer is high, and that would be more than the risk from the CT scan. Cancer treatment, well, I told you that there's 14 million new cases of cancer every year in the world. Not only do we use radiation to stage it, we use radiation to treat it, and about 6 million of the cancer cases get treated with radiation in the world every year. And I must say, Japan has been a pioneer in all the different new ways of treating cancers, and you should be commended for that. The interesting thing about all that, though, is that when you treat a lung cancer, so let's say that's the lung cancer on the CT scan, you can't just get radiation to the lung cancer only. You're going to get some radiation to the other tissues around it. And with RERF data and your gifts, we can actually calculate what the risk is to those other tissues. And we know that if we give you radiation therapy, your chances of getting another cancer in, say, 20 years from the radiation is around 1%, which is really not much if you can actually kill the cancer you've got at the moment. What about heart disease and stroke? Does your data affect these people in any way? The answer is yes. There are 17 million people who die every year from heart attacks and strokes. So what is it we do with the radiation? Basically, we do lots of things. We do CT scans, so that's CT scans of the heart, and you can see the blood vessels. We do angiography to look at the blood vessels and stick catheters in there and dilate the arteries up. We do nuclear medicine studies, these things to look at the blood flow to different parts of the heart. They're all reasonably high-dose procedures. So again, we don't do these as screening things. We've got to know that there's some benefit risk that we worked out. But since we know the doses from these procedures, we actually know what the risk is, and we can tell a patient that. In addition, I must say, not only is there radiation to the patient, but of course the radiation comes in and bounces off the patient and exposes the doctors who are taking care of you, and we have to deal with that issue. You'll see in a second here that this guy has a problem because he ought to be wearing leaded glasses so he doesn't get cataracts. And where does that data come from? It comes from you guys. there are 8 million, count them, if there's 2 billion x-rays being done, somebody's got to do all of those. So there's 8 million x-ray workers in the world, and they often are young women, and we have film badges on all of them, and we use the data to set limits for what they're allowed to get each quarter or a month or a year, and that's based on trying to keep their doses as low as possible, but these people know that they're going to get more dose than the public, for sure. And because of you, they understand how much the risk is and what the benefits are to them. We also, you've heard, use the data from RERF for radiation protection, not only for workers, but for the public. Just to say, at the moment, we are redoing all the radiation standards in the United States, and we are relooking at all the best data epidemiologically we can get. And we've spent a lot of time pulling apart all the epidemiological studies that we found. We've done this for about 2 years. And your study is definitely the highest quality study that exists anywhere in the world. And this is a younger Dr. Nira. You may recognize him, being younger there. He's already pointed out to you that it's the gold standard because there's a large number of subjects. The follow-up is long. You have all age groups, lots of good dosimetry. And it is the classic study. And again, I don't want to say research, it's the gift. Here, just to show you something, this is about out of 4 pages of epidemiological studies that we've looked at and torn apart for 2 years. And I know you can't read much of it, but you see your studies here, and it gets superior, 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 and a rank of 10 out of 10. And looking at all the different aspects of the epidemiology, and no other studies come close to that. What about other things? What about somebody who's flying around in an airplane? Does your data affect them at all? Having just flown here yesterday, I would tell you yes. I just spent 14 hours on the plane. But people, how many people are flying right now as we're sitting here? 500,000 people are in the air flying right now. And there's about 6 billion people flying every single day. And actually, the dose rates, when you go up in the altitude, they're higher than at sea level because you get cosmic rays coming in at you. And you can see here, the dose rate at 12,000 meters is 5 microsieverts an hour, which is 8 times higher than it would be in Tokyo. So you get in an airplane, go up, your dose is 8 times higher. Why aren't all these people hopping up and down and going crazy about radiation and cancer? Because we know the risks. And we've also done studies on people. For example, the airline pilots and stewardesses, they fly even more than we do. And, you know, you'd think they might get more cancer, but we've done the estimates with your data, and then we've done the epidemiology, and they don't have more cancer that we've ever been able to detect. But it really gives those people confidence in what they're doing. There are, of course, people traveling and getting, in the old days, there were all sorts of x-ray machines that used radiation. They're not so much anymore, but they're still sort of around, something to think about. All your baggage gets x-rayed, obviously, as it goes through. While I'm supposed to talk about daily lives, and this is not exactly daily life stuff, but, oh, by the way, how many people have been astronauts? Over 800. I had to look up how many people have actually walked on the moon. Turns out to be 12. I didn't know that. You'd think we'd know that. But anyhow, this is some of your astronauts. And certainly, nowadays, with all the talk about going to Mars, there's a very, very, very serious radiation issue about being out there in space for 3 years and coming back. Now, it's a different kind of radiation for the most part, but all the early estimates, before we actually send people out there and see what happens, are coming from data like yours. So you're providing the base data for people on the Mars trips. Radiation exposure to the eye, RERF data by Dr. Nakashima and others have shown that radiation cataracts are occurring at lower doses than we ever thought were possible. And we're now making people wear leaded glasses, and we're making the CT techs, we're beating on all our technologists, so when you have a head scan, They're trying to keep the lens of your eye out of the beam by tilting your head. But this particular article and your data has changed the radiation limits to the lens of the eye internationally, and now we're changing them in the United States as well. There's lots of people who are pregnant and working with radiation, and there are all sorts of questions. There's lots of data we have from you, and the data really has kept, when we counsel the patients and we show them the data and say at this dose level we don't really see anything, we've saved tens of thousands of babies who would have been aborted otherwise by getting recommendations from, say, gynecologists who really don't understand the data that well. I'll just go back one just to show you this. So this is a patient who came in who was in a car accident, was losing blood pressure. We knew she was pregnant, and we knew we were going to do a CT scan, pregnant or not. I mean, there was not much choice. Her blood pressure was going down. You can see one kidney has blood flow, the other one doesn't. That's because this kidney was ripped off the aorta, and that's where she was losing blood. The baby is here, all surrounded by blood. This took 3 minutes to do the scan. We sent her to the operating room. Everybody survived. And later she came and she wanted to know what the risk was to the baby. But I could tell her from your data. I get things like this off the internet, but certainly around Fukushima. This is a young couple who said, we have been evacuated at a gymnasium, and our house is located in the evacuation zone, and they're concerned about exposure to their baby and their children and so on. And that information is absolutely crucial to dealing with not only Fukushima, but all the people who get exposed to X-rays inadvertently. Also, your data is critical for, I've been a worker or I've been exposed, can I have a child now? Not because I'm pregnant now, but can I have a child, and is there going to be a problem for that child from the radiation? And there is data also from RERF, really the important stuff, and it's by some guy named Grant, who I think I met once or twice over there. And it says, however, children of people exposed to the atomic bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki had no indications of delirious health effects after 62 years. I would say it doesn't mean there aren't any or might not be some, but nobody's seen them yet. So that's very encouraging to people who've been at Fukushima who might want to do family planning and have children. I mean, they just have to take all that into consideration. And the data has also been obviously important in Fukushima, as we talked about, not only for the UN reports, but for the International Atomic Energy Agency reports. There's this NEWA guy who keeps showing up here. I don't know. But I have a picture here of myself with your Prime Minister, and he wanted some recommendations. I have to tell you, that picture, I got him to do that with just me. Actually, Dr. NEWA was there and a whole bunch of other people. I wasn't the only one there, but the recommendations to your Prime Minister are really based on your data, your gifts. Have we learned everything there is to learn? No. I can tell you these are the gifts that have come so far. There may be lots of gifts coming in the future in terms of knowledge. There's obviously continuing analysis of existing data. There's collection of more data on the people who are still surviving. The biological samples you've heard about. There are some interesting things by Dr. Takahashi and others from RERF about heart disease, and they're sorting those things out now, and stroke. There's still a lot of work to be done there. So the group on the Hill, again, I don't think of them as research in my mind. I think of them as taking your data, your gift, and passing it on to me and everybody else in the world. That's what I think their major function is to me. Back from the 30th anniversary, Dr. Kubo mentioned that none of this would be possible without the cooperation of participants in the health examinations and with your help. And I certainly agree with that and echo that. So in summary, the RER studies and your gifts with your cooperation have provided the world with an absolutely unique and essential tools that allow us to assess any activity that involves radiation. And to give me on the scale, I now have the weights I can put on the risk side of the scale. And I still have trouble with the benefit side. I'm trying to figure out how to do those weights, but it's really not that important. So in summary, we thank you all, and I wish you best wishes on your 70th anniversary. Thank you.